Bjorn Borg took Alex Eala completely by surprise with his most treasured possession, the golden racket. It is one of the most irreplaceable items in Swedish tennis history. And the reason he chose her, of all players, to pass it on to will break you in ways you are not ready for. There was no grand ceremony here, no staged sponsorship activation or PR campaign created by brand managers in some corporate conference room. What happened in that private space in Stockholm between the 68-year-old Swedish legend, a man who had just survived a cancer operation and stared death in the face through the pages of his memoir, and a 20-year-old girl from the Philippines, was something so profoundly emotional that even words struggle to describe it. Before we reach the emotional peak of this story, you must understand something fundamental. The golden racket was never originally Bjorn Borg's. It was the very item that changed the trajectory of a young boy's life, a 9-year-old in Sweden named Söderelier, who was drawn away from ice hockey and into tennis. That racket became the symbol of the very journey that would lead to 11 Grand Slam titles, 5 consecutive Wimbledon championships, and a legacy so great that tennis continues to hold his name in comparison to the sport's best even 50 years later. The golden racket was the foundation of Bjorn Borg's incredible journey. But he gave it up to Alex Eala. This decision, and the reasons behind it, will change everything you think about tennis. You see, tennis giants are not only indebted to the sport for the titles and accolades they've won. They are often tied to it in ways that go beyond what most can comprehend. This story, and the decision Borg made, will forever change the way we think about legacy, sacrifice, and giving. Bjorn Borg was diagnosed with aggressive prostate cancer in 2023, and this diagnosis forced him to reconsider everything. His calm demeanor, which earned him the nickname the Iceman, had always been his defining trait. He remained unshaken even under the highest pressure of competition. But now, facing his mortality, he was forced to confront life in a way that had always been just out of reach. And with that came a re-evaluation of his career, his legacy, and the golden racket. This racket, given to him at a young age when he was just a boy, had remained a symbol of his journey, the very starting point of everything he accomplished in tennis. It wasn't something he ever wanted to part with, as it represented the beginning of everything. For 68 years, he held on to it, never once thinking about letting go. But then something changed. Alex Eala's victory in Miami triggered something in Borg. She deserved to win. She had earned it. But more than that, she represented something Borg could no longer deny. The next generation of tennis players who had worked just as hard, just as relentlessly, for their dreams. Borg's decision to pass on the golden racket to Alexandra was not just a moment of generosity. It was a realization that his legacy wasn't just about the trophies, the records, or even the fans. It was about handing something real, something meaningful, to someone who could carry it forward. And in doing so, he gave up a part of his past, but in return, he passed the torch to someone who deserved to carry it into the future. In 2024, after Borg's emergency surgery and long recovery, he had time to reflect on his career. In his autobiography, released in 2025, Borg spoke candidly about his cancer diagnosis and the impact it had on him. He had always been private, but the fear of losing everything he worked for brought him to a place of clarity. The golden racket, once just a symbol of his own journey, was now a legacy to be passed on. Borg realized that it was no longer just his story. It was a story that needed to be shared. A story that transcended his own accomplishments and opened the door for others to carry the flame. He had held on to that racket for so long, but in the end, it was not just about him. It was about the future of the sport and the young players who would come after him. Bjorn Borg's ability to remain unshaken, both in his prime and during sickness, was a characteristic that had defined him throughout his life. His composure, seemingly unbreakable, persisted even when faced with the daunting reality of a cancer diagnosis. Yet this time, his battle with cancer proved to be different. This challenge, which he had previously avoided confronting, began to break him. It forced him to question the meaning of his entire career. What did it all truly signify beyond the statistics, the titles, and the records? What had he contributed to the sport that had shaped him, and more importantly, what was left for him to do in his final years? Not for fame or profit, but as a human being for the future of tennis. As the years passed and all of his peers had long since stepped off the court, Borg turned to writing his autobiography. Released in 2025, it provided a raw and emotional look at his journey, including the cancer diagnosis that shocked readers. His calm demeanor, which had earned him the title of the Iceman throughout his career, was shattered during this battle with mortality. The autobiography disclosed the surgery, the fear, and the overwhelming dread that he had long kept hidden from the public. The details of his recovery, the clarity that came during the quiet hours of rest, and the realization that history does not live in awards or public recognition became evident. True history, he wrote, lives in the items that are passed from one generation to the next, the personal, irreplaceable objects that hold deep meaning beyond their surface value. Borg's golden racket, once a simple gift from his father at the age of 9, was the embodiment of this history. It was the symbol of everything Borg had achieved. His transition from a young boy hitting a wall in Sweden to a tennis legend with 11 Grand Slam titles. It wasn't just a trophy or a piece of memorabilia. It was the very item that started it all. The racket had remained a private part of his life for 68 years, untouched by commercialization, its significance never tainted by media or sponsors. But at the age of 68, after surviving cancer and reflecting on his legacy, Borg made a decision that would change the course of tennis history. He decided to pass the racket to Alexandra Eala, a 20-year-old from the Philippines who had shown a similar passion and self-discipline for the game that Borg had shown at her age. This wasn't a decision made for PR or for sponsorship. It wasn't a calculated move. It was a deep human gesture. Borg saw in Eala the same fire that had burned inside him as a young boy, an unrelenting passion for the game, not fueled by external validation, but driven by internal conviction. It was this self-sufficiency and determination that Borg recognized in her. Eala, like Borg, had trained in isolation, dedicating countless hours without the assurance that anyone would notice. Borg recognized that in her, and he knew that this was the essence of true greatness in any sport. Borg's gesture was a message, not just to Eala, but to the entire tennis community. It was a reminder that those who have reached the pinnacle of their sport owe an active debt to future generations. This debt isn't one of obligation or expectation. It's the debt of passing on the torch, of recognizing that the sport is bigger than any individual achievement. By giving Eala the golden racket, Borg wasn't just handing over a piece of his past. He was giving her the responsibility to carry that legacy forward. This wasn't a simple transfer of an object. It was a passing of the spirit of tennis itself. The act of passing on something so personal, so irreplaceable, wasn't about business or surface-level symbolism. It was about acknowledging that true greatness isn't measured in titles or records alone. It's measured in the willingness to invest in others, to recognize the traits that made you who you are, and to offer them to someone who can carry that legacy into the future. Borg's decision to hand over the golden racket to Eala was the most profound and lasting message he could offer to the next generation of tennis players. That the sport and its history isn't just about the champions. It's about the next generation and the ongoing commitment to pass on the lessons learned.